Hey, Honors World Lit class, we're back to talk about Book 6 of the Aeneid, in which Aeneas takes his journey into the underworld to visit the spirit of his father. And this may seem like a little bit of a strange interlude in the Aeneid. It doesn't quite feel like anything else we've read in the Aeneid so far, but we're going to talk about today how it serves kind of a real purpose in the hero's journey that we were talking about before spring break. I hope you remember some of the stuff we were mentioning about the hero's journey. But also in the overall character development of Aeneas as well. There is something that Aeneas gains from this journey in particular in regard to his perspective on his destiny. And we've been talking about destiny and how that's really important to Aeneas and his sense of duty and how important those are both to Aeneas and then to Virgil as the author. So we're going to dive into the underworld with Aeneas and talk about what all is happening in Book 6. So Book 6, what I really want to focus back on is the hero's journey here, because what happens in Book 6 is so pivotal, not just to Aeneas' hero's journey, but it's a very common theme in the hero's journey as we see it throughout world literature. And so what we're going to talk about today is one particular element of the hero's journey that we didn't really discuss in much detail when we were talking about the overall hero's journey, and we were reflecting back on the Iliad and the Odyssey and how we saw the hero's journey there. It is an aspect that does happen for Odysseus, although this particular element does not appear for Achilles in the Iliad, but it does appear for Odysseus in the Odyssey. And that element is Katabasis. That is, excuse me, that's an ancient Greek word, and so not one that we're probably familiar with, but it is a traditional part of the hero's journey. And it means in ancient Greek to go down. That's the literal definition. And so you can kind of see probably where we're going with this. With the definition to go down, and what you read in Book 6, you can probably guess where we're going. However, it doesn't necessarily just mean a trip to the underworld. That is one aspect of it, but it could also just be a descent of various types. Usually a descent that transforms the character in some way, but this could look like many different options. So it could simply be a moving downhill, could count as a katabasis in an epic. It could be sinking winds and suns. It could be a military retreat of some sort. That would be a more likely kind of katabasis that we would see in the Iliad. It could be a trip to the coast. You know, Achilles does travel to the coast to speak with his mother towards the beginning of the book, and that is kind of a transformative experience for the plot of the story. But of course, and the most well-known form of katabasis is the journey to the underworld. Definitely the most prominent form, the thing that you're going to see perhaps most represented in world literature in various hero stories is this journey to the underworld. So the journey to the underworld, it really does appear in many, many different hero stories, and I want to give a few examples of that. One of which most of you will probably remember from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is Enkidu's journey to the underworld. Now, this does show us that the journey to the underworld doesn't always have to be a physical journey to the underworld. Many times it is, but in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu takes that journey in a dream. right? And then he shares that dream with Gilgamesh. So it's not an actual physical transition into the realm of the dead yet for Enkidu, because he's dreaming, of course, of where he will go once he dies, as he's lying sick on his bed. But that is still a Katabasis, it's still a journey to the underworld in which he is kind of discovering that realm and brings a sense of knowledge and a new kind of driving purpose to Gilgamesh. Of course, Gilgamesh's goal after Enkidu relates that becomes immortality, right? And that drives the rest of the epic once Enkidu has died. So it is still very much a journey to the underworld and serves very much the same purpose as many of the other journeys to the underworld in other hero stories. Odysseus does this to an extent. Now, unlike Aeneas, he doesn't actually journey into the realm of the dead. He journeys to kind of the gateway, the house of the dead, and then he kind of performs this ritual and the souls of the dead appear to him. But again, in many regards, it's the same kind of thing. And he emerges with a knowledge of how to appease Poseidon. And really he does do much of what Aeneas does in some way. He talks to heroes and figures of the past, including Achilles. And so there's a very similar kind of narrative there with Achilles talking to Odysseus and Tiresias talking to Odysseus, as there is with Aeneas talking to people like Paris and his father and others who are in the underworld when he travels down there. So again, a very similar kind of story. We saw another example in the labors of Hercules, right? Hercules journeys into the underworld with a very different purpose, not really to talk to people, right? But one of his tasks is to take Cerberus and bring him back. But there still is that journey to the underworld. And in fact, like Odysseus and Hercules' journeys are referenced in the Aeneid, right? When Aeneas travels down and talks to Charon, the ferryman, those journeys are brought up, right? And so there, Aeneas is existing in that world where those things have happened. Obviously, we have Aeneas in the Aeneid, and I'm not going to belabor that one because you guys read about that one. And we'll talk a little bit more about the whole purpose of that and why he does that here in a moment. In another Roman work, Metamorphoses by Ovid, the character Orpheus, who is this talented musician, makes a journey to the underworld to retrieve his wife and bring her back to the land of the living. It's really kind of a Roman love story in many regards, one that's perhaps more heartfelt and compelling than Dido and Aeneas' love story. But we see that kind of journey to the underworld with Orpheus in Metamorphoses. If you look at myths of the Norsemen, Loki, so we're talking about, if you're like, Loki, Marvel. Well, not Marvel, because Thor and Loki and all of that are based on these ancient Norse myths. If you've not read them, it's an interesting read, and it's interesting to see what's similar to Marvel and what is completely different. Loki's still a trickster character, though, and he tricks people into accidentally killing Odin's son Balder, who is kind of his most beloved son. He's kind of missing in Marvel. But he tricks people into killing Odin's son Balder, and Odin makes a journey into the realm of the dead to consult a seer to see if there's a way to bring Balder back to Asgard. And so again, a very similar kind of journey to the underworld. In many ways, people have drawn parallels to these ancient hero stories and Christ's death and resurrection. And there certainly are many similarities there. And I think this gets back at that when we were talking about the definition of myth and how myth is um, a language of cultural symbols that can speak truth and values, um, in addition to falsehood, right? I mean, we talked about it can speak falsehood, but it can also speak truth and values. And we talked about C.S. Lewis's essay, Myth Became Fact. And this is, in fact, one of the points that he makes, right? He talks about some of these ancient myths and legends that have this katabasis, this journey to the underworld. And he says that's all, it's fascinating and it's a compelling story. And it's something that we are drawn into and fascinated by. And it's been a part of storytelling for centuries, this journey to the underworld and this coming out of it. And yet he says it's all taken place in a kind of distant, non-specific, long time ago, once upon a time kind of era, right? That's always been the context for these stories. And he makes the point that it becomes reality, right, in the person of Jesus. And Lewis is making kind of the point that perhaps all these myths that have come before and after are just an expression of a truth that we know deep within our souls. The narrative of God is woven throughout the world from the beginning of time. And Paul talks about this in Romans, right? He talks about that God's truth has been woven into creation. And I think that could mean beyond just the physical creation, just nature. I think God has been weaving his truth and his story into the world from the beginning of time. And people have been telling the story of God without even knowing they were telling the story of God. And that's kind of the point that Lewis is making, is that this myth of this katabasis, this journey to the underworld and this death and resurrection sort of thing, has been woven into the fabric of our storytelling from the beginning of time, because it's part of God's testimony. And that's part of what Paul is talking about, is God has been testifying to the world from the beginning of time. So that people are without excuse. Like, he has put it out there plain for everybody to see. So that nobody can say, well, I didn't know, right? I think God is certainly gracious to people that didn't know, and that's actually part of the narrative of Katabasis, of Journey to the Underworld with Christ, is that he actually goes to the land of the dead and preaches, so that people who lived prior to the life of Christ have a chance to respond to him, because they didn't have a chance because he wasn't born yet. And so all of that to say, right? Like, part of Lewis's essay, Myth Became Fact, is saying that God has woven his story into the stories of the world from the beginning of time. And the stories of Journey to the Underworld, both before and after the time of Christ, are all pointing back to that historical moment when it became reality. It was just in the realm of myth, and then it became a fact in the person of Christ. And the fact is that Christ's journey into death and resurrection, his journey to the realm of the dead and being resurrected, is profoundly different from any of these other stories. All of these other stories are about kind of proving the worth of the hero, right? And what the hero can gain from this. But Christ's journey is profoundly different. He actually conquers death and hell, not just for himself, but for all of humanity. And that's a profoundly different narrative than what these other stories are telling. And it is so much better. It is so much more freeing to know that not only did Christ prove his own worth and reward himself, but he rewarded all of humanity and set us free from the powers of death and hell by his katabasis, by his journey to the underworld, by his death and resurrection. It is so much more of a glorious story than the stories of the heroes. Yes, the stories of the heroes are interesting, but Lewis would argue that's all to point us to the one time and the one moment when it becomes real, in the person of Christ. So I hope that makes you excited. That makes me excited to just think about how God has been testifying, even in stories that people typically think have nothing to do with God. God's been testifying to himself from the beginning of time because he cares about us so much, because he wants us to know him. He's been telling us about himself, even through people who didn't realize they were telling us about him. And I think that's just really cool. So the result of the journey to the underworld, and this is where I want to talk about why this is such an important part of the Aeneid, why Stanley Lombardo chose to leave Book 6 in the Essential Aeneid. Because the journey does a couple things. One of the things that it does is it serves as proof of the character's status as a hero. It proves that Aeneas is divine, right? That he is a true son of Venus. But it also proves his worth. And you get the Roman concept of perfection. You may remember back to when we were first talking about Roman literature and culture, Luke talked to us about how important kind of perfection in ritual and doing all the right things was. And you see that clearly in this book, because before Aeneas gets to journey to the underworld, he has to kind of clear all his sins and make everything right before he can go on the journey. I think this could also point us to one of the cultural influences that often inhibits us in our Christian walk. We have some of that Roman influence in Western culture. And oftentimes you might hear people say, well, I just need to get my act together before I come to God, which is the exact opposite of what the Bible teaches, right? The Bible teaches that God comes to the broken and the hurting and the messed up and the sinful, and he transforms them, right? It's through his power that people begin to change, right? Rather than kind of getting all my ducks in a row and doing everything right before I can come to God. I think that's a very Roman concept that's sneaked into our culture. And it's a reminder of that whole right, wrong, indifferent thing, right? I mean, the Romans didn't get that right? And we sometimes have to fight against that cultural heritage that we have of I've got to get everything right before I can come to God. It's a very Roman concept. That's what Aeneas does, right? The prophetess tells him all these things he's got to do before he can journey to the underworld. And so we can see that aspect of Roman culture and values there, but it can also remind us that that's not what we believe in, and we believe in something much more free, and God who loves us and comes to us in our brokenness. The other really important thing about the journey to the underworld for Aeneas, and why this is an important part of his journey, is that the hero almost always, when they undergo Katabasis, when they journey to the underworld, they return from the underworld with a special reward. Now, sometimes this is a special object, what mythologists, I guess would be the best word for them, people who study myth, call a quest object, right? He comes back with kind of a talisman. We talked about the talisman when we talked about the hero's journey. And so it's sometimes his journey to the underworld that brings him back with the talisman, or maybe the quest object is something that was needed by someone else. So like when Hercules goes to the underworld and comes back with Cerberus, the three-headed dog, that's a quest object, right? He's come back with a quest object. Sometimes it's a loved one, the soul of a loved one. This is true in the case of Orpheus when he journeys to bring back his wife. If you've ever seen the Disney animated version of Hercules, you know that Hercules, in that version, he doesn't journey into the underworld to get Cerberus. He actually journeys to get the soul of Megara back. And so that would be another example of the journey to get the loved one. Sometimes it is heightened knowledge. That's what we see with Odysseus, right? He comes away with a knowledge of how to appease Poseidon and how to bring his journey to a successful end. This is also what Aeneas is getting out of this, right? It's a heightened knowledge and a sense of purpose. So he comes in, and what his father, Anchises, does is shows him a bunch of souls by the river Lethe who are getting ready for their eventual kind of rebirth. He says the souls are kind of come, and there's this kind of idea, it's almost a kind of reincarnation idea, except they don't remember who they are, and they will eventually become these new people. And what this does on multiple levels, in a story level, it gives Aeneas a glimpse into his future, to see who his descendants will be and the great empire, the great Roman Empire that he will help to found by his actions. And that renews his sense of purpose. It renews his sense of duty, because at several points along the way, he's almost lost that, right? One of the most recent being with Dido, but after that, if you read the summary of Book 5, there's also a whole nother incident where the Trojan women that are traveling with them try to burn the ships because they don't want to keep traveling. They just want to settle there. They want to be done, right? Of course, they're doing that at the prompting of Juno, who hates Aeneas. But that causes Aeneas to question his sense of duty and his sense of purpose. And what he comes out of the underworld with is this sense of purpose, because he sees, when his father Anchises shows him, he sees what the future is going to be and what he is going to help establish. And that gives him the drive throughout the rest of the epic to really say, yes, this is what I'm going for. This is what I'm going to do. And this is a halfway point in the epic, right? The Aeneid is 12 books long. And so book 6 is the middle. We're right smack dab in the middle. And Aeneas is having a shift in perspective. He's had kind of all these waverings and obstacles keeping him from pursuing his duty, and he's been unsure himself of what exactly his duty is. But he's going to emerge from the underworld with a new sense of purpose, having seen the future of his empire, to be able to move forward and do that. That's not going to mean he's not going to have obstacles, and certainly Juno is still set up against him, is going to make it hard for him, but he's not going to question his purpose again. He's going to keep moving forward. What it accomplishes outside of the world of the story is that this is one of the real chances for Virgil to put Caesar Augustus in the line of Aeneas, right? It makes Caesar Augustus kind of a divine figure and establishes his right to rule. So this is really where he gets to create the mythic history for the Romans. Like, that's always been his purpose, and that's what he's accomplishing through the whole epic. But here he brings it home, because he names a bunch of Roman people that all the people living during Caesar Augustus's day would say, yes, I know that. I know who he's talking about. Look at this long lineage and line of all these Romans who are descended from Aeneas. And that just kind of legitimizes it and makes this the Roman national epic. This is really where Virgil just gives a punch and drives that home, and he says, Aeneas is our founding hero, right? We have this mythic history. Let's be a proud empire and a proud nation. And he really drives that home here through what's done in this book. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of Aeneas's Katabasis as well, because not only is this a significant book in the Aeneid, but it's had a huge impact on another major literary work. And I've mentioned a couple times before that Virgil was very highly respected by medieval Christians, that they saw him as a virtuous man, and that they really respected him and his work. And so he was highly read in the medieval period. And one medieval author, Dante Alighieri, who's most famous for his work, The Divine Comedy, shows a great deal of impact from Virgil. We know that he considered Virgil to be his poetic inspiration, and he really valued him and looked to him as kind of his poetic master, in a sense. Dante felt that everything that he had learned about writing, he kind of learned from reading Virgil. And so it's no surprise that when Dante undertakes his Divine Comedy, which is an allegory, it's a spiritual allegory for your recognition that you're a sinner, your repentance, and then your salvation. And so the Divine Comedy is an allegory for Dante's own spiritual journey. In that, it shouldn't be a surprise that we see a great deal of influence from Virgil, since Virgil was so highly respected by medieval Christians as a virtuous man, even though they knew he wasn't a Christian and they didn't suffer under any delusions that he was a Christian, and neither does Dante. But he definitely had a huge literary impact on the medieval time period and on Dante in particular. And so Dante chooses to frame his allegory of his spiritual journey as kind of an extended Katabasis. So Dante first journeys through hell, and then through purgatory. He comes out of hell, right? And that's kind of where the traditional Katabasis would end. But Dante goes further than that. He then journeys through purgatory. Dante was a Catholic, so he believed in purgatory, which is this refining place for souls. When the souls of Christians die, they go there to be refined and purified from their sins before they go to heaven. And so he journeys through purgatory and then through paradise. And that's a very radical difference as well from a lot of the Katabasis in the past, right? The Katabasis in a lot of other literary works is a simple journey through hell or the underworld and back again, and you come back to the real world. But Dante goes beyond that, and he journeys through hell and then through purgatory and up into paradise. And so there's a very Christian difference and significance there. But he uses he uses Virgil's influence to really guide a lot of his vision. And it's not exactly the same. And obviously, since Virgil only kind of tells of a underworld, Dante only really uses Virgil's vision in hell and then a little bit in purgatory. But I want to show you just a few of the examples, and we may, just depending on time and so forth, we may look at a few sections of the Divine Comedy by Dante when we get to medieval literature. I think that would be an interesting study since we've read the Aeneid, to see the influence of Virgil on Dante. But let me walk you through a few similarities. So one of the main similarities is that Dante, he casts himself as the main character in his allegory, which makes sense. He's not saying that this really happened to him, but this is kind of his allegorical version of himself. And he has a guide who also explains the underworld or hell when he journeys through. In the Aeneid, for Aeneas, that is the prophetess. In Dante's case, the guide is actually Virgil himself. And I think that's kind of a nod to Virgil in a couple ways from Dante. It's a nod, obviously, that Virgil is his poetic inspiration, but it's also kind of saying that what Dante has created as his vision of hell and purgatory has been influenced by what Virgil did. It's nowhere near exactly the same, but there is definite influence there. I think that's a nod to that. It's also a nod, and this is, well, maybe more than a nod. He's also kind of very directly saying that Virgil's knowledge was limited, right, because he was not a Christian. And so Virgil could offer insight into hell and purgatory, and that's what he guides Dante through his hell and purgatory. But he can't explain paradise because he was not a Christian. And so when Dante journeys through paradise, it's a woman who is significant in Dante's life, Beatrice, who conducts him and guides him through paradise. And so there is that guide. That's one of the similarities. Many of the other characters and elements of the underworld are repeated. So Charon the ferryman is included in Dante's version as well. And the description is nearly identical. Like if you were to read the two descriptions, very, very similar. And the scenario on the shore is very, very similar as well, where the guide is telling Charon why this is allowable. So that is a very similar scenario. The river Styx that they're ferried across is also there. The idea of King Minos as the judge assigning the souls to their appropriate punishment, that appears in the Aeneid, and Dante reuses that in the Divine Comedy in the Inferno part in particular. The city of Dis is also present. Cerberus is also present as well, though he plays a slightly different role in the Inferno. And then the river Lethe is also there. Now, we'll talk about the river Lethe because obviously elements are transformed to serve Christian purpose, right? And it's important to remember that Dante is never saying, oh, this is what hell and purgatory and paradise are exactly like. No, it's an allegory. He's not claiming to do that. He's just giving a kind of symbolic representation of his own spiritual journey and of spiritual truths, right? And that's what he's trying to get at. And there are a lot of rich, rich spiritual truths in the Divine Comedy. I really encourage you to read it. It's a very insightful work. Obviously, he also journeys through purgatory and paradise, which is a very Christian thing that we talked about already. And then the river Lethe, he transforms that. In the Aeneid, it just brings people forgetfulness of their past life, and they kind of become a nobody until they're reborn. Dante transforms the river Lethe, puts it at the top of the mountain of purgatory. And once people have kind of undergone the purification process, their final purification is to drink from the river Lethe and the river Aeneid. He puts two rivers there. But the river Lethe does not bring forgetfulness of who you are, but rather forgetfulness of sin and all the sin you've ever done. And so this transforms into a very beautiful symbol of something that we believe will happen to us when we journey into paradise with God, is that we will no longer remember our sin. Right? It will be no more. It will be as if it never was. And that will be a beautiful thing. And then Dante adds in the river Aeneid, which brings to mind a memory of all the good you've ever done for God. And so that becomes a very, very beautiful picture, and Dante's really able to transform that. So hopefully you've come away with a little bit more insight into another element of the hero's journey. And hopefully you've enjoyed talking about this a little bit. I'm going to give a couple ways for you to respond beneath the lecture video, and I encourage you to take advantage of those and to join in discussion and enjoy discussion with one another. And hopefully here before too long, I hope we might be able to do one of our book sessions as a video conference. So that we can get some of that person-to-person discussion going on that we're missing while we're away, because that kind of stinks, and that's one of the really fun things about this class. So, but for now, thanks for listening to my thoughts on Book 6, and then participate in the rest of the assignment, and I will see you guys very soon.